The stagecoach hit another rut in the frozen road, and Clara Lawson pressed her gloved hand against the window to steady herself as she stared out at the endless white landscape of Colorado Territory in January of 1878. She had traveled over 1,000 miles to marry a man she had never met, only to arrive in Denver 3 days ago and learn that her intended husband had married someone else just 2 weeks prior without bothering to send word. Now she sat in this drafty coach bound for Placerville, the only town within reasonable distance that had advertised for women willing to brave the winter isolation of mining country, carrying a letter of introduction to the local boarding house and exactly $7 to her name. The other passengers, 2 miners and an older woman, had made their discomfort with her situation abundantly clear. The woman had actually moved seats when Clara explained why she was traveling alone. Mail-order brides who arrived unwanted were considered bad luck at best and women of questionable morals at worst. Clara kept her chin high despite the shame burning in her chest. She had done nothing wrong. She was 22 years old, educated enough to read and write, skilled with a needle, and willing to work hard. If Harold Pemberton of Denver had decided a younger woman with a larger dowry suited him better, that was his moral failing, not hers. The coach lurched again, and the driver shouted something unintelligible from above. Through the window, Clara could see they were climbing into mountains now, the road narrowing to a precarious ribbon carved into the hillside. Pine trees heavy with snow crowded close on one side while a steep drop fell away on the other. The altitude made her ears pop and her breath come shorter. "Storm's coming in," one of the miners muttered, peering past her out the window. "We should have waited in Denver another day." "Driver knows these roads," the other said, but he did not sound convinced. Within the hour, the snow began to fall in earnest. What had been occasional flurries became a curtain of white that reduced visibility to almost nothing. The temperature inside the coach dropped until Clara could see her breath forming clouds with each exhalation. She pulled her wool cloak tighter and tried not to think about what would happen if they became stranded out here. The coach slowed to a crawl, then stopped entirely. Voices shouted outside, muffled by the wind and snow. The door yanked open and the driver's face appeared, red with cold and etched with worry. "Roads blocked ahead. Tree came down. We are going to have to turn back, but I need everyone out to lighten the load while we maneuver." They climbed out into the blizzard. The wind cut through Clara's layers like they were paper. She stood with the other passengers on the narrow strip of road, watching the driver and his partner attempt to turn the team and coach around on the limited space available. The horses stamped and snorted, their breath steaming in the frigid air. "This is madness," the older woman shouted over the wind. "We will all freeze." Clara was beginning to think she might be right when she heard it, a deep rumbling sound that seemed to come from the mountain itself. The miners heard it too. Their faces went pale. "Avalanche," one of them breathed. The world erupted into chaos. Snow and rocks roared down the mountainside above them. The driver screamed at the horses, trying to get them moving. People scattered. Clara ran blindly in the direction that seemed safest, away from the terrible sound, but her skirts caught in the deep snow and she fell hard. She tried to get up, but the snow was already pouring over her, heavy and suffocating. She could not breathe, could not see, could not tell which way was up. Then hands gripped her shoulders and hauled her upward with such force that her feet left the ground. An arm like an iron bar wrapped around her waist, and she was moving, being carried at a run. Her rescuer's shoulder dug into her stomach as he ran with her slung over his shoulder like a sack of grain. The roar of the avalanche was deafening. Snow pelted them from all directions. They burst through a wall of white into sudden dimness. The roar became muffled. Clara realized they were in some kind of shelter, a cave perhaps. Her rescuer set her on her feet but kept one hand on her arm until she had her balance. She looked up at him, gasping for breath. He was tall, perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days of stubble on his jaw. His eyes were a startling blue-gray, like winter ice, and they studied her with an intensity that made her forget the cold for a moment. He wore a heavy sheepskin coat and sturdy boots, and a rifle was slung across his back. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough, like he did not use it often. Clara shook her head, then realized she was trembling so hard her teeth chattered. "The others," she managed. "The coach." He was already moving to the cave entrance, peering out into the white chaos. The avalanche had subsided, leaving an eerie quiet broken only by the whistle of wind. From where Clara stood, she could see nothing but snow and more snow. "Stay here," he said. "Do not leave this cave, understand?" She nodded, and he was gone, disappearing into the blizzard like a ghost. Clara wrapped her arms around herself and moved deeper into the cave, away from the biting wind. It was not large, perhaps 20 feet deep and 10 feet wide, but it was dry and the stone walls blocked the worst of the wind. She could see evidence that someone used it regularly. There was a neat stack of firewood against one wall, a tin box that probably held supplies, and several wool blankets folded in a corner. Time passed with agonizing slowness. Clara paced to keep warm and strained her ears for any sound that might tell her what was happening outside. Had the others survived? Had her rescuer found them? And who was he to have a prepared shelter in such a remote location? When he finally returned, he was not alone. He half carried, half dragged one of the miners through the cave entrance. The man's face was gray, and blood seeped from a gash on his forehead. Clara rushed to help, and together they lowered the injured man onto the cave floor. "The others?" she asked. The man with the ice-colored eyes shook his head grimly. "Coach went over the edge. Driver and his partner went with it. I found the other woman, but she was already gone. This one," he nodded at the miner, "was buried shallow enough to dig out. I could not find the other miner. Either he got clear and made it to safety, or he is under too much snow for me to reach him alone." Clara felt the words like physical blows. All those people, dead in an instant. She had been speaking to them only minutes ago. She looked down at her shaking hands and saw they were red with cold. The man was already moving with efficient purpose. He built a fire using the stored wood and some tinder from his pocket, got it blazing with practiced ease. He retrieved the tin box and pulled out strips of cloth, which he handed to Clara. "His head needs binding. Can you do that while I check him for other injuries?" Clara nodded and knelt beside the unconscious miner. She cleaned the wound as best she could with snow melted in her hands, until the warmth from the growing fire made her fingers flexible enough for the delicate work of bandaging. Her rescuer ran his hands over the miner's arms and legs, feeling for breaks, then covered him with 2 of the wool blankets. "I think he will live if we can keep him warm," he said. "But we are stuck here until the storm passes. How long will that be? Could be hours. Could be days." He met her eyes across the fire. "I am Owen Xavier. I have a cabin about 2 miles west of here. I was checking my trap lines when I heard your coach coming up the road and saw the avalanche starting. What is your name?" "Clara Lawson." She hesitated, then added, "I was going to Placerville." Long way to travel in winter. It was not quite a question, but the curiosity was there. "I was supposed to be married in Denver, but when I arrived, my intended had married someone else." The words tasted bitter. "I heard there was work in Placerville, so I thought I might start over there." Owen fed more wood to the fire. "Placerville is rough country, mining town. Not many women, and the ones who are there are either married or working in the saloons. A woman alone would not have an easy time of it. I would have managed. Clara heard the defensiveness in her own voice. I am sure you would have. There was no mockery in his tone, just a simple statement of fact. But you are not going to Placerville now. Once this storm clears, I will take you to my cabin. It is warm and stocked for winter. You can stay there until spring when the roads are passable again. Clara stared at him. I cannot possibly stay at your cabin. I do not know you. It would not be proper. Proper went out the window when an avalanche nearly killed you. Owen's voice was patient. The choice is simple. Come to my cabin where there is food, heat, and shelter, or try to make it to Placerville through winter storms in mountains you do not know, with no supplies and no transportation. Assuming you even make it down the mountain alive, which I doubt. What about him? Clara gestured to the unconscious miner. He comes too, until he is well enough to travel or until spring, whichever comes first. My cabin is not large, but it will hold 3. Clara wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. She had no other options. Why are you helping me? You do not know me either. Owen was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the fire. When he spoke, his voice was soft. I have been alone in these mountains for 3 years. I came out here after my wife died in childbirth. The baby, too. I told myself I wanted solitude, that I was done with people and towns and all the grief they bring. But seeing you about to be buried in that avalanche, knowing I might be able to save you, I did not even think. I just ran. Maybe that means I am not as done with the world as I thought I was. The honesty in his words touched something deep in Clara's chest. She looked at this rough stranger who had saved her life and saw the same kind of pain she carried. Different circumstances, but the same fundamental loneliness, the same sense of being unwanted and cast aside by the world. I am sorry about your wife and child, she said quietly. It was 3 years ago. The pain is duller now. He stood and moved to the cave entrance. Storm is getting worse. We are here for the night at least. Try to get some rest. I will keep watch. Clara did not think she could possibly sleep, but exhaustion and shock had taken their toll. She wrapped herself in one of the remaining blankets and lay down near the fire, using her small carpet bag as a pillow. The last thing she saw before her eyes closed was Owen silhouetted against the white world outside, keeping guard. She woke to gray light filtering into the cave and the smell of something cooking. Owen crouched by the fire, turning strips of dried meat in a small pan. The miner still lay unconscious, but his breathing seemed steadier. How long did I sleep? Clara asked, sitting up. Her body ached from the hard stone floor. Most of the night. Storm finally broke about an hour ago. We can make for my cabin soon. He handed her a piece of the cooked meat and a tin cup of water. Eat. It is a hard walk, even in good conditions. The meat was salty and tough, but Clara chewed it gratefully. She was hungrier than she had realized. While they ate, the miner stirred and groaned. Owen was beside him immediately, helping him sit up slowly. Easy now. You took a blow to the head. Do you remember what happened? The miner looked around with confused eyes. Avalanche. Where are the others? Gone, Owen said simply. You were lucky. The man's face crumpled. Charlie. Charlie was right next to me. I am sorry. I could not find him. They gave the miner, whose name turned out to be Samuel, some food and water, then prepared to leave. Owen fashioned a rough crutch from a branch because Samuel's left leg was badly bruised, though thankfully not broken. They wrapped themselves in the blankets like cloaks for extra warmth, and Owen distributed the remaining supplies from the tin box into packs they could carry. The world outside the cave was transformed. Snow lay several feet deep, sculpting the landscape into strange new shapes. The road was completely invisible, buried under the avalanche. In the distance, Clara could see where the coach had gone over the edge. Nothing remained visible but a few scattered pieces of wreckage far below. Owen led them west, breaking trail through the deep snow. It was brutal, exhausting work. Clara's skirts were soon soaked and frozen stiff, weighing her down. She fell repeatedly, and each time Owen helped her up without comment or impatience. Samuel struggled with his injured leg, leaning heavily on his crutch, his face gray with pain. It took them 4 hours to cover the 2 miles. By the time Owen's cabin came into view, Clara was moving purely on stubborn will. The cabin was small but solidly built, set in a clearing surrounded by tall pines. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Clara realized Owen must have left a fire banked before he went out to check his trap lines. Inside, the cabin was dim but blessedly warm. It consisted of one main room with a stone fireplace, a rough table and chairs, a bed in one corner and storage shelves along the walls. A ladder led up to a small loft space. Everything was neat and orderly, almost obsessively so, like the home of a man who had too much time to arrange and rearrange his few possessions. Owen settled Samuel in the bed and went to tend the fire. Clara stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, dripping melting snow onto the plank floor, unsure what to do with herself. "There is a trunk under the loft ladder," Owen said without turning around. "It has my wife's old clothes. They might fit you better than what you are wearing. You should change before you catch your death." Clara found the trunk and opened it carefully. Inside were neatly folded dresses, undergarments, a nightgown, and a thick wool shawl. Everything was plain but well made. She ran her fingers over the fabric and felt the weight of this stranger's grief. These clothes had belonged to a woman who died, a woman Owen had loved. "Are you certain?" she asked. "They are doing no good in a trunk. Sarah would have wanted them used." His voice was steady, but Clara heard the slight hitch when he said his wife's name. She took the clothes and changed behind a blanket Owen hung in the corner for privacy. The dress fit reasonably well, though Sarah had been a bit taller. Clara rolled up the sleeves and hem, then emerged feeling more herself than she had since the avalanche. Over the next few days, they fell into an uneasy routine. The cabin had only one bed, so Owen insisted Clara sleep there while he took the loft, and Samuel, once he was strong enough to climb the ladder, joined him. Owen spent his days checking his trap lines and hunting, providing meat for their small household. Clara took over the cooking and cleaning, grateful to have useful work to occupy her hands and mind. Samuel was a quiet man, friendly enough but clearly grieving the loss of his partner Charlie. He and Clara did not talk much, but there was a comfortable understanding between them, 2 people who had survived something terrible together. Owen was harder to understand. He was not unfriendly, but he maintained a careful distance, speaking only when necessary, disappearing into the woods for hours at a time. Yet Clara caught him watching her sometimes when he thought she was not looking, his ice-blue eyes following her movements around the cabin with an expression she could not read. A week after they arrived at the cabin, Clara was preparing dinner when Owen came in from checking his traps, his face tight with something that might have been pain. "You are bleeding," Clara said, pointing at his hand. He glanced down at the gash across his palm, already crusted with frozen blood. "Knife slipped while I was skinning a rabbit. It is nothing. It needs cleaning or it will fester. Sit down." For a moment she thought he would refuse, but then he sat at the table and let her examine the wound. It was deep but clean. Clara heated water and washed it carefully, then bound it with strips of cloth torn from one of her old petticoats. "You are good at this," Owen observed, "tending injuries." "My mother was a nurse during the war. She taught me." Clara tied off the bandage. "There. Try not to use that hand for a day or 2 if you can help it. I will need to check the trap lines tomorrow. Then I will come with you and help. Owen looked at her with surprise. It is hard work, cold, sometimes bloody. I am not afraid of hard work or blood. Clara met his eyes steadily. I cannot just sit in this cabin all winter. I need to do something useful. Something shifted in Owen's expression. All right, but we leave at first light and you do exactly what I say. The mountains are dangerous for those who do not know them. The next morning, Clara dressed in her warmest clothes and followed Owen out into the frozen wilderness. The world was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. Sunlight glittered on the snow, and the sky was a blue so deep it almost hurt to look at. Owen moved through the forest with the confidence of long practice, reading signs in the landscape that Clara could not see. They checked a dozen traps, finding 3 with rabbits and 1 with a fox. Owen showed Clara how to remove the animals humanely and reset the traps. Her hands were clumsy in the thick gloves, but she was determined to learn. When they stopped to rest at midday, Owen built a small fire and made tea from pine needles, surprising Clara with its pleasant, resinous taste. "How did you learn all this?" she asked. "To survive out here alone." "Trial and error mostly. I knew some basics from growing up on a ranch in Wyoming, but I had to learn the rest the hard way. Nearly starved my first winter." He stared into the fire. "I was not thinking clearly when I came up here. I just wanted to be away from everything that reminded me of Sarah and the life we had planned." "Do you regret it? Coming here?" Owen was quiet for a long moment. "I did not until recently. This winter has been the first time I have felt lonely instead of just alone. And I cannot tell if that is better or worse." Clara understood exactly what he meant. The loneliness was worse in some ways because it meant you were still capable of wanting connection, which meant you were still capable of being hurt. But it was also better because it meant you were still alive inside, not just going through the motions of survival. They worked together in companionable silence, and by the time they returned to the cabin in the late afternoon, Clara felt like she had accomplished something real. Samuel had kept the fire going and even attempted to make stew, though it was more water than substance. They ate it anyway, supplementing it with the fresh rabbit Owen prepared. That night, as Clara lay in the bed that had been Sarah's, she found herself thinking about Owen. Not just his obvious competence and strength, but the gentleness underneath. The way he had helped Samuel without complaint, the patience he showed when teaching her about the traps, the careful way he had preserved his wife's belongings. She had known him only a week, yet she felt safer with him than she had with people she had known her whole life. It was a dangerous thought. Clara had come west looking for security, for a place to belong, and had learned painfully that promises could be broken and plans could fall apart. Owen had saved her life, was sheltering her through the winter, but that did not mean he wanted anything more from her than temporary companionship. In the spring, when the roads cleared, she would need to leave and make her own way. She could not afford to develop feelings for a man who had made it clear he wanted to be alone. But feelings, Clara was learning, did not care much about what was affordable or wise. The winter deepened. February brought storms that lasted for days, burying the cabin in snow up to the windows. Clara and Owen and Samuel lived in their small world of firelight and routine, cut off from everything beyond the clearing. They talked more as the weeks passed, sharing stories of their lives before. Clara learned that Owen had grown up the youngest of 5 sons on a cattle ranch, that he had met Sarah at a church social in Cheyenne, that they had been married only a year before she died. Samuel shared that he and Charlie had been prospecting partners for 5 years, that they had come to Colorado hoping to strike it rich, but had found only enough gold to keep them going. Clara told them about growing up in Philadelphia, about her father's death when she was 16, about working as a seamstress to help her mother make ends meet, about how her mother had died 2 years ago, leaving Clara alone with no family and few prospects, which was why she had answered Harold Pemberton's advertisement for a mail-order bride in the first place. "He seemed respectable from his letters," she said one evening as they sat around the fire. "He claimed to be a successful merchant, widowed, looking for a sensible woman to help run his household. I thought it would be a good match, practical if not romantic." "Sounds lonely," Owen said quietly. Clara looked at him. "It was, but I told myself that was foolish thinking. Romance is for novels. Real life requires practical choices. Maybe real life requires both." Owen's eyes held hers across the firelight. "Maybe giving up on romance is just another way of giving up on hope." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning Clara was afraid to examine too closely. Samuel cleared his throat and announced he was tired, climbing up to the loft and leaving Clara and Owen alone. "You must have loved your wife very much," Clara said softly. "To run from the world when you lost her." "I did love her, but I have been thinking lately that she would not have wanted this for me. Sarah was always trying to get me to talk more, to spend time with people. She said I had a tendency to disappear into my own head." Owen smiled faintly at the memory. "She was right, and by coming out here I just made it worse. I have spent 3 years talking only to myself and the mountains. You are talking to me now." "Yes." Owen's gaze was intense. "I am, and I find I do not mind it nearly as much as I thought I would." Clara's heart beat faster. She knew she should say something light, deflect the moment, but she could not make herself do it. "I do not mind it either, any of this. I know I should. I should be frightened or uncomfortable, living in a cabin with 2 strange men in the middle of nowhere. But I am not. I feel more at ease here than I have in years." "You are not what I expected," Owen said. "What did you expect?" "Someone more fragile, I suppose. Someone who would complain about the hardship or break down from the shock of the avalanche. But you just kept going. You pulled your weight without being asked. You learned to check traps in freezing weather and never once complained about sleeping in a dead woman's bed." "Would complaining have changed anything?" "No, but most people would have done it anyway." Clara smiled. "My mother used to say that complaining was just a way of giving voice to your misery, and she had no patience for it. She believed in doing what needed to be done and saving your breath for the work. Smart woman. She was. I wish I had more of her strength. You have plenty of your own." The compliment warmed Clara more than the fire. They sat in comfortable silence, and she found herself studying Owen's profile in the flickering light. He had a strong face, weathered by sun and wind, with lines around his eyes that suggested he had smiled more before grief found him. She wondered what he looked like when he was truly happy. As if he felt her gaze, Owen turned to look at her. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The air between them seemed to thicken with possibility. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She thought he might reach for her, and she knew with sudden certainty that she would not pull away. But then Owen stood abruptly. "It is late. You should get some rest." The moment shattered. Clara nodded, feeling foolish, and retreated to the bed. She lay awake for a long time, listening to Owen move around the cabin, banking the fire and checking the door latch. When he finally climbed to the loft, she heard the creak of wood as he settled into his bedroll. She told herself she was being ridiculous. Owen was grieving his wife. He had saved Clara's life, but that did not mean he had any romantic interest in her. She was a temporary guest, nothing more. In the spring she would leave and Owen would return to his solitary existence, and none of this would matter, but her heart, stubborn and foolish, did not believe it. March came with alternating storms and brief, tantalizing glimpses of sun. The snow began to settle and compact. no longer so deep that every step was a struggle. Owen started talking about the roads opening up, about how Samuel would probably be able to travel to Placerville by April if the weather held. "What about you?" Samuel asked Clara one day when Owen was out hunting. "Will you go to Placerville too?" Clara looked up from the shirt she was mending. "I do not know, I suppose so, unless Owen knows of somewhere else that might have worked for a woman. You could stay here." "Samuel, I cannot stay here. This is Owen's cabin, his life. He has already been more generous than anyone could expect." "I have eyes, Clara. I see how you two look at each other when you think no one is watching." Samuel's voice was gentle. "And I see how he has changed since we got here. He smiles now. He talks. The man who saved me from that avalanche was half ghost. The man I am living with now is alive again. That does not mean he wants me to stay." "Have you asked him?" Clara shook her head. The thought of asking Owen outright if she could stay, of exposing herself to potential rejection, was terrifying. Better to leave in the spring with her dignity intact than to hear him explain kindly that he had never intended for this to be permanent. But Samuel's words stuck with her. That evening, she paid more attention to Owen's behavior, and she saw what Samuel meant. Owen did smile more now, small flashes of humor that lit his face. He sat closer to her than he used to, found excuses to touch her hand when passing her something, met her eyes and held her gaze. She was not imagining this. Something was growing between them, tentative and uncertain but real. The question was whether either of them would be brave enough to acknowledge it. The answer came 2 days later in the form of a spring storm that dropped freezing rain instead of snow. Clara woke to the sound of ice pelting the roof and windows. When she came out of the sleeping area, she found Owen already up, staring out the window with a grim expression. "What is wrong?" she asked. "Ice storm. The worst kind of weather. If it keeps up, branches will start coming down, maybe whole trees. We will need to bring in more firewood before the pile outside freezes solid." They spent the morning hauling wood, working in shifts so someone was always inside keeping Samuel company and maintaining the fire. The world outside had become a glittering, treacherous nightmare. Every surface was coated in ice that made walking hazardous. Clara slipped twice, and the second time she went down hard on her hip, gasping at the pain. Owen was beside her in an instant, helping her up, his face tight with concern. "Are you hurt? Just bruised?" But when she tried to take a step, her leg nearly gave out. The pain was sharp and immediate. Without a word, Owen swept her up into his arms and carried her back to the cabin. Clara wanted to protest that she could walk, but the truth was she was not sure she could. She let herself lean against his chest, feeling the solid strength of him, the way his heart beat fast from exertion. Inside, he set her carefully on the bed and knelt to examine her leg. His hands were gentle but thorough, pressing carefully against her hip and thigh. Clara bit her lip against the pain. "Nothing broken," he said finally, "but you will have a bad bruise. You need to stay off it for a day or two. We still need more firewood. Samuel and I can manage. You rest." Clara wanted to argue, but Owen's expression left no room for debate. She lay back on the bed and watched him return to the work, a strange feeling blooming in her chest. It had been so long since anyone had taken care of her, worried about her, looked at her the way Owen had when she fell. The storm lasted 3 days. The world outside became an ice sculpture garden, beautiful and deadly. A large pine tree near the clearing split under the weight of ice, crashing down with a sound like thunder. Owen went out to assess the damage and came back shaking his head. Lucky it fell away from the cabin. "But we are going to have a mess to clear when this melts." They were trapped inside, the 3 of them, in increasingly close quarters. Samuel seemed to sense the tension between Owen and Clara and spent most of his time in the loft, giving them space. Clara's hip healed slowly, the bruise spectacular shades of purple and yellow. Owen checked it daily, his touch professional but his eyes betraying something deeper. On the third night, Clara could not sleep. Her hip ached and her mind would not settle. She got up carefully and moved to sit by the fire, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. She was surprised when Owen climbed down from the loft and joined her. "Cannot sleep either," he asked. "Too much time lying in bed, I think, and my hip is sore." Owen added wood to the fire, then sat beside her. They watched the flames in silence for a while. "The roads will open soon," he said finally. "Another month, maybe less. Samuel will want to head to Placerville, see if he can find work." "Yes." Clara's chest felt tight. "What will you do?" "Will you go with him?" This was the moment. Clara could give a safe answer, agree that yes, she would go to Placerville, preserve the careful distance between them, or she could be brave. She took a breath. "I do not want to go to Placerville. I do not want to leave here at all, if I am being honest. But I know this is your home, your refuge. You did not ask for me to land in your life, and I will not impose where I am not wanted." Owen turned to look at her, his ice-blue eyes searching her face. "Not wanted." "Clara, do you really not know?" "Know what?" "That I wake up every morning dreading the day you leave. That I find excuses to stay in the cabin instead of checking traps just so I can be near you. That I have not felt this way since Sarah died, and it terrifies me because I know how much it hurts to lose someone you love." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. "Owen, I know it is too soon. I know we have only known each other a few months. But I cannot let you leave without telling you that I want you to stay. Not as a guest, not as someone I rescued from an avalanche, but as someone I am falling in love with." The words hung in the air between them, fragile and precious. Clara reached out and took his hand, feeling the roughness of his calloused palm against hers, the warmth of his skin. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I have been for weeks. I was just too afraid to say it." Owen's face transformed. The wariness and pain that always shadowed his expression melted away, replaced by something open and hopeful. He raised his free hand to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "I never thought I would feel this way again," he said roughly. "I never thought I would want to." "We do not have to be afraid," Clara said. "Not of this, not of each other." "No," Owen agreed. "We do not." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but Clara did not want to pull away. She had spent too long being practical, protecting herself, settling for less than she deserved. When Owen's lips met hers, gentle and questioning, she kissed him back with all the longing she had been holding inside. The kiss deepened, growing more urgent. Owen's arms came around her, pulling her close, and Clara melted into him, into the warmth and strength and surprising gentleness of him. She had been kissed before, chased pecks from the man she had been briefly engaged to in Philadelphia, but this was nothing like that. This was fire and need and the feeling of coming home to a place she had never been. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "Stay with me," he said. "Not just for the spring. Forever, marry me, Clara, make a life with me in these mountains." "Yes." The word came without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They sat by the fire until dawn, talking and kissing and making plans. Owen told her about his dreams of expanding the cabin, maybe starting a small ranch in the valley below where the land was more open. Clara talked about wanting to learn everything about living in the mountains, about becoming the kind of woman who could survive anything. "You already are that woman," Owen said. "You survived an avalanche, a winter in the wilderness, and a lonely cowboy's awkward courtship." Clara laughed. "It was not that awkward. I spent 2 months trying to convince myself I was not attracted to you. How did that work out? Terribly. Owen kissed her again. Thank God. When Samuel came down from the loft in the morning, he took one look at them sitting close together by the fire, Clara's hand in Owen's, and smiled. About time, was all he said. The ice melted. April brought real warmth and the first signs of green pushing through the wet earth. The snow receded steadily, revealing the landscape beneath. Owen and Clara worked together to repair winter damage, clear fallen branches, and prepare the trap lines for closure until next season. Samuel helped where he could, but it was clear he was eager to move on, to get back to the work of seeking his fortune. On a clear morning in mid-April, Owen and Samuel made a trip down to where the road was now passable, checking conditions. They returned with news that a stage would be coming through at the end of the week, and Samuel could catch it to Placerville. "What will you do there?" Clara asked as they prepared dinner that evening. "Find work in the mines, most likely. Save up enough to stake a claim of my own. Charlie and I always talked about hitting the mother lode. I figure I owe it to him to keep trying." Samuel looked between Clara and Owen. "What about you two? When is the wedding?" "We have been thinking about that," Owen said. "The nearest town with a proper preacher is Fairplay, about 2 days' ride from here. We could go there, get married official and legal. Or," Clara said slowly, "we could do it here. Samuel could stand witness. We could speak our vows to each other in the place where we fell in love. The legal paperwork can come later when we make a trip to town." Owen looked at her with such tenderness it made her chest ache. "I like that idea, if Samuel is willing." "I would be honored," Samuel said gruffly. They chose the day before Samuel was set to leave. The morning dawned clear and bright, the sky an impossible blue. Clara wore her best dress, one she had brought from Philadelphia and never thought she would have occasion to wear. Owen put on a clean shirt and even trimmed his beard. Samuel picked wildflowers that were just beginning to bloom and fashioned them into a rough bouquet. They stood in the clearing in front of the cabin, the mountains rising around them in all their ancient glory. Owen took Clara's hands in his, and they spoke their vows without ceremony or script, just two people promising to love and care for each other for as long as they both lived. "I promise to keep you warm through the winters and safe through the storms," Owen said. "I promise to never take for granted that you chose to stay when you could have left. I promise to love you with everything I am." Clara's voice shook but did not break. "I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes. I promise to build a life with you in this place you love. I promise to remind you every day that you deserve to be happy again. I now pronounce you married in the eyes of God in these mountains," Samuel declared. "You may kiss your bride, Owen." And Owen did, pulling Clara into his arms and kissing her thoroughly while Samuel cheered. Later, they would say it was the happiest day of their lives to that point, the beginning of everything they would build together. The next morning, they said goodbye to Samuel. Owen had put together a pack of supplies for him, enough to see him through to Placerville and beyond. Clara gave him the wool scarf she had knitted during the long winter months. "You take care of yourself," she told him, hugging him tight. "And if you are ever back this way, you have a place to stay. I will remember that." Samuel shook Owen's hand, then surprised him by pulling him into a brief embrace. "You are a good man, Owen Xavier. You saved my life and then you showed me how to keep living. I will not forget that." They walked with him to the road and watched until he disappeared around a bend, heading toward Placerville and whatever future awaited him there. Then they were alone, truly alone for the first time since the avalanche. Clara turned to Owen. "What do we do now?" Owen smiled, that full, genuine smile that still surprised her with its appearance. "Now we start our life together. Let me show you something." He led her through the woods to a place she had never been, about half a mile from the cabin. They emerged from the trees onto a gentle slope that overlooked a wide valley. The view was breathtaking. Mountains ringed the valley on all sides, and a stream cut through the middle, glinting in the sunlight. "This is the land I was telling you about," Owen said. "The valley where I want to build a ranch. There is good grazing, water year-round, and enough flat ground to build a proper house. We could keep cattle, maybe some horses. It would be hard work, but we could make something real here." Clara looked at the valley and saw not just what it was, but what it could be. A house with a wide porch, barns and corrals, fields of grass dotted with cattle, children playing in the stream. A life built on love and hard work and the wild beauty of this place. "When do we start?" she asked. They began that spring. Owen had saved money from years of selling furs and was able to purchase a small herd of cattle and the lumber they needed for building. They spent the summer constructing a cabin in the valley, larger than the one in the mountains, with 2 rooms and a loft and a real stove for cooking. Clara learned to ride and helped Owen with the cattle. She planted a vegetable garden that actually produced, surprising them both. It was hard work, exhausting and sometimes frustrating, but they did it together. And at night they fell into bed wrapped around each other, content in a way Clara had never imagined possible. By the time winter came again, they were settled in the new cabin. They made trips to Fairplay and had their marriage officially recorded. Clara wrote letters to the few friends she still had in Philadelphia, telling them about her new life. She did not mention that her husband had not been the man she came west to marry, only that she was happier than she had ever been. Their first child was born in September of 1879, a boy they named Jack after Owen's father. Clara labored through a long night with only Owen to help her, but when she finally held her son, red-faced and squalling, she felt a joy so intense it was almost painful. Owen cried when he held Jack for the first time, tears he did not bother to hide. "I thought I would never have this," he said hoarsely. "A family again, children, I thought that was over for me." "It is just beginning," Clara told him. They were right. Jack was followed by a daughter, Lucy, in 1881 and another son, Thomas, in 1883. The ranch prospered. They added more cattle, built a barn, even hired help during the busiest seasons. The little valley became known as Xavier Valley, and their ranch was a landmark for travelers passing through. Samuel came to visit in the summer of 1884, prosperous and engaged to be married to a woman he had met in Placerville. He stayed a week and met all the children, who called him Uncle Samuel and demanded stories of the avalanche and the winter in the mountains. "You two did well for yourselves," he said to Owen as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "You built something good here." "We were lucky," Owen said. "That storm could have killed us all, maybe, but it did not, and look what came of it instead." Samuel gestured at the valley, the house, the sound of Clara singing to the children inside. "The worst day of your life led to the best." Owen thought about that after Samuel left, about how the avalanche that killed so many had also brought Clara into his life, about how grief and loss had driven him into the mountains, but love had brought him back. Life was strange that way, full of terrible beauty and beautiful terror, and all you could do was hold tight to the people you loved and be grateful for every day you had together. Years passed. The children grew. Jack became a serious boy who loved the cattle and talked about expanding the ranch someday. Lucy was wild and fearless, riding before she could properly walk, always pushing boundaries. Thomas was the gentle one, fascinated by books and learning, though he could work as hard as any hand when needed. Clara and Owen grew older together, their faces weathering like the mountains around them. their hands becoming more calloused and scarred from work. But they still looked at each other, the way they had that winter in the mountain cabin, still reached for each other in the night, still found moments to steal kisses when the children were not watching. In 1890, Placerville had grown enough to support a proper school, and they sent Thomas there to study, though the parting was hard. Jack, at 11, took on more responsibility with the ranch. Lucy, at 9, declared she would never leave the valley and demanded to learn everything her brothers knew about running cattle. Clara stood on the porch of their home one evening in late summer, watching her family. Owen was teaching Jack how to repair tack. Lucy was supposedly doing chores but had actually climbed into the hayloft to read one of Thomas's books. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Owen came to stand beside her, slipping an arm around her waist. It was a familiar gesture, comforting in its constancy. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "That avalanche," Clara said. "The one that brought me here. I was so frightened that day. I thought I was going to die buried in snow, alone and unwanted. But you did not die. No, I lived. And I found you, and all of this." She gestured at the valley, the ranch, their children. "Sometimes I think about the life I would have had if I had made it to Placerville that day, or if Harold Pemberton had actually married me in Denver, and I am grateful those things did not happen." Owen pulled her closer. "I am grateful too. Grateful that winter brought me a mail-order bride nobody else wanted, because it turned out she was the only person I needed. And I got a lonely cowboy who wanted only me." Clara turned in his arms to face him. "I love you, Owen Xavier. I have loved you since that winter, and I will love you all the winters still to come." He kissed her as the sun set, as their children laughed and played around them, as the mountains stood eternal watch over the valley they had made their home. They had years still ahead of them. More children would come, grandchildren eventually. The ranch would expand and prosper. There would be hard times, 2 droughts and harsh winters, the loss of Owen's brother to pneumonia, the year Lucy fell from a horse and broke her arm badly enough that they feared it would not heal right, though it did. Life in the wilderness was never easy. But they faced it all together, Clara and Owen, the mail-order bride nobody wanted and the lonely cowboy who had wanted only her. They built a legacy in those mountains, a family and a home that would endure long after they were gone. And on cold winter nights, when the snow fell thick and the wind howled around the house, Owen would pull Clara close and tell their children and grandchildren the story of how they met. About an avalanche and a cave and a woman who refused to give up. About a man who thought his life was over, learning that it was only beginning. "The mountains gave her to me," he would say, "and I have thanked them every day since." Clara would smile and add, "And the mountains gave me a home, not just a place but a person to belong to. Everything I needed was right here, waiting for me to be brave enough to claim it." Their love story became legend in those parts. People spoke of the Xavier Ranch, of the couple who built it from nothing, of the mail-order bride who found her destiny in the most unexpected way. And always, they remembered that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are really just doorways to the best ones, if we are brave enough to walk through. Clara and Owen grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They taught their children and grandchildren about resilience, about kindness, about the importance of choosing love even when it frightens you. They taught them that home is not a place you find, but something you build with the people who matter most. When Owen died in 1910 at the age of 62, peacefully in his sleep after a full day of work on the ranch he loved, Clara mourned him deeply. But she did not regret a single day of their life together. She lived another 8 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren, still sharp and capable, still telling stories of that winter in the mountains when everything changed. She died in the same bed she had shared with Owen, in the house they had built together, looking out at the valley that bore their name. Her last words were to Jack, now a man of 40 with children of his own. "Tell them," she said, her voice faint but clear. "Tell them all that love is worth the risk. That the bravest thing you can do is open your heart even when you are afraid. Your father taught me that. The mountains taught me that, and it made all the difference." Jack buried his mother beside his father on a hill overlooking the valley, with a view of the mountains that had brought them together. He carved their names into matching headstones, along with the dates of their lives and a simple inscription Clara had requested. 2 souls, 1 life, endless love. The Xavier Ranch continued for generations, tended by children and grandchildren who carried the story of Clara and Owen forward. The cabin in the mountains, where they had spent that first winter, was preserved as a family landmark. Young couples would hike up to see it, standing in the small space where 2 frightened, lonely people had found each other and dared to hope. The story changed lives even decades after Clara and Owen were gone. A young woman considering leaving an unhappy situation would hear about the mail-order bride who was rejected but found something better. A man grieving a loss would hear about the lonely cowboy who learned to love again. And they would take courage from it, these people who never met Clara or Owen but were touched by what they built together. Because that is the nature of love stories, especially the true ones. They ripple outward, touching lives and changing hearts, reminding us all that beauty can come from disaster, that hope can survive the coldest winter, and that sometimes the person you are meant to find is waiting in the last place you ever expected to look. In the end, Clara was right about one thing. She had needed to be brave to claim the life waiting for her. Brave enough to survive an avalanche, to spend a winter with strangers, to admit her feelings for a grieving man, to build a life in a harsh and unforgiving place. But Owen was right too. The mountains had given her to him, a gift he had not known he needed until she appeared. And together, they had created something that outlasted them both. Not just a ranch or a family, though those were important, but a story. A reminder that love finds us in the most unexpected moments, and the wisest thing we can do is recognize it and hold on tight. The mail-order bride nobody wanted became the most wanted woman in Owen Xavier's world. And the lonely cowboy who thought his heart was frozen became the man who taught an entire family what it meant to love without fear. Their story ended, as all stories do. But what they built together, the love and the life and the legacy that went on forever, echoing through generations, a testament to the power of hope and the resilience of the human heart. And somewhere in those Colorado mountains, in a valley that still bears their name, you can almost feel their presence on cold winter nights. 2 souls who found each other when both had given up hope, who built a love strong enough to survive anything, who proved that sometimes being unwanted is just the first step toward finding exactly where you are meant to be.